This season, Instacart has your back to school. As in, they've got your back to school lunch favorites, like snack packs and fresh fruit. And they've got your back to school supplies, like backpacks, binders, and pencils. And they've got your back when your kid casually tells you they have a huge school project due tomorrow. Let's face it, we were all that kid. So first call your parents to say I'm sorry, and then download the Instacart app to get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes all school year long. Get a $0 delivery fee for your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Have you ever covered a carpet stain with a rug? Ignored a leaky faucet? Pretended your half-painted living room is supposed to look like that? Well, you're not alone. We've all got unfinished home projects. But there's an easier way. Thumbtack is the app that makes it easier to care for your home. Pull out your phone and in just a few taps, search, chat, and book highly rated pros right in your neighborhood. Download Thumbtack and start caring for your home the easier way.
Content warning. This episode includes discussion of murder and violence, including the murder of a pregnant woman.
Today on the cheat sheet, we're going to be taking you all around the country to a number of different locales for some cases. One of these cases is something we have covered in the past, and the rest of them are brand new. And interestingly enough, like these kind of pair off into groups of 2 pretty easily. So in Indiana, we'll talk about a case that's definitely murder, but competency is in question. In Michigan, we'll talk about a case where something definitely bad, very bad happened, but is it even murder? We're going to talk about revenge attacks of different types in Kansas and South Dakota. And we're going to talk about a case where someone may have not seen anything in Illinois. And then a case where, unfortunately, no one saw anything in Pennsylvania. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is The Cheat Sheet. Mayors and Mayhem. Before we begin, though, I think we want to take a little bit of time to shout out our friends Alice and Brett from the Prosecutors Podcast. They recently published a piece on Fox News, an opinion piece called The Dark Side of True Crime. We're going to link to that in our show notes. I think it is a very necessary read for anyone who cares about true crime, creators and listeners alike, and who may be concerned about the direction our beloved genre is sort of slouching in at this moment, in my view. What do you think, Kevin?
I think it was a great piece. I recommend it.
So check that out. It talks about basically how we have some creators and instigators who are using true crime cases, especially high-profile ones, to sort of work out their anger issues and emotional problems, and that's not appropriate for anybody, and people should stop doing that. So check it out, and hopefully it can start a good conversation around that.
Yeah, it's a great article. It's a bit more nuanced than your pithy summary, but it's well worth reading.
It is much more nuanced and well articulated, but that is what is happening. I'm sure people who know.
This episode is sponsored by AutoTrader. Credit scores, down payments, interest rates, Car buying can be a numbers game, but you don't have to be a math expert to get the keys to your dream car. Just use Kelly Blue Book My Wallet on AutoTrader. Crunch your numbers and get your personalized results so you know exactly how much you'll pay each month for your car. It's like having a magic wand for your wallet. Presto! The car you've been wanting is now within reach. So hit the road and leave your calculator at home. Find your next car on autotrader.com.
What makes a life a good one? Is it the adventure you have? Or the friends you find along the way? Maybe it's pursuing your passion while striving to protect, defend, and save what you believe in every single day. So, what makes a life a good one? In the Coast Guard, we think it's all of the above and more, but you'll have to find out for yourself. Visit gocoastguard.com to learn more.
Now, let's go to our backyard, Indianapolis. And Kevin, this case is going to blow your mind because this is going to turn into a veritable stroll down memory lane for us somehow.
Yeah, you refused to tell me the details about this case because you said, I want to surprise you when we're recording.
Well, Kevin is a man who just will, wants to know Christmas presents ahead of time and all this stuff. And, sometimes it's fun to just get a valid and true reaction as you're going through it. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of spring some of this on you last minute.
But the fact is, when I react to things, I'm usually understated. People can't even tell when I'm serious
That's
or
true.
not. So it's not like I'm going to say, oh, no, like my mouth goes agog and everything.
Oh, man, I'm really disappointed then. I was really hoping you'd jump out of your chair and trip over and run out of the house. So then I'd have to do the cheat sheet all by myself.
That's your secret dream.
Yes, that's my secret nightmare. So, Anya, what do you think about this? Pretty good, pretty awful, Anya. That no one wants to listen to that. People unsubscribe en masse. So this is a case in Indianapolis. This is the one that we have covered before. This is the case of David Heiner. This is a man who is accused of murdering 2 women on the east side of Indianapolis. And I would describe this as, if the prosecution's arguments are factual and correct, and this man is in fact guilty, then this is the case where I think we had a nascent serial killer, because he targeted 2 victims, Shannon Juanita Lassier and Marianne Weiss. They both were older white women who were sort of out in the same area at night, killed in a very similar way, dumped in a similar area. The whole thing just strikes me as, if this had kept going, this would, certainly be a serial killer case. So he was arrested, and now he is facing trial for murder. The 2 prosecutors are Amy Jacobson and Anne Frangos who are deputy prosecutors with Marion County. Evan Dominguez and Laura Pitts are for the defense. They're Marion County Public Defender Agency lawyers. And the judge is Judge Jennifer Harrison. Do you know why that name may sound familiar to you, Kevin?
Well, of course, that's the judge in the Caden Smith case that we discussed last year.
Absolutely. So that's one stop on the memory lane train. This is a judge who attracted some controversy in the Caden Smith case when she threw out the gun evidence in that case, which was later put back in by the appeals court. So this is another case she's taking on, and she's making rulings in this one as well. And in addition, this is another thing that kind of echoes, and I just wanted to bring it up because I think a lot of people are so focused on Delphi regarding cameras in the courtroom. Cindy Herbert, a hardworking producer at local station WTHR, you may recognize her name. She's made a lot of filings in Delphi asking for cameras to be allowed in the courtroom. She did the same here in February and April. Both were shot down, or both were, Harrison ruled against both. That's not really too unusual in Indiana. Cameras in courtrooms have really not been a thing. It's only been allowed very recently, so it doesn't necessarily surprise me that we're seeing judges be slow to allow that, especially since there are downsides to it. So anyway, some other familiar things. Prosecutor Jacobson in March filed a protective order asking for there be limits to what the defense can do with the discovery. Don't duplicate it. Don't spread it around. Only let your staff and paralegals look at it. Don't let the defendant look at it unless you're there with him. if you have experts look at it, make sure they sign paperwork so that they don't leak it all over the internet and it gets on YouTube. Or they didn't literally say that, but basically that's the point of this. And the judge granted that. But here's where it really gets familiar. The prosecution side had a subpoena ducis tecum with the Miami County Prosecutor's Office. So why don't you explain our long history of covering the Miami County Prosecutor's Office?
Well, give me a moment because my mouth is agog.
Oh, no.
I don't know what you were expecting there, but
I just was like, it's fun to see some familiar faces in this.
We covered the Miami County Prosecutor's Office pretty extensively because they did, frankly, exemplary work on the Kegan Kline case, a case that they spent years working on. And one of the real stars of Jeff Sinkovich's office down there, of course, is Courtney Allwine.
Yes, and she's in this too. So Courtney Allwine comes up in this case because essentially in Miami County, Heiner previously faced charges for aggravated battery and battery resulting in moderate bodily injury. And the case in Miami County that he was involved in dragged on for years. Courtney Allwine was the lead prosecutor on it. Gary Cook started for the defense, and then he withdrew, and then William Berkshire stepped in. Of course, he ended up representing Kegan Kline as well. So some familiar faces. The judge was J. David Grund of Miami Superior Court. So not Tim Spar.
That's not a
no, but I mean, I don't
want
want to leave him out just because we've never covered him before. That would be rude. So on June 14th, 2022, Berkshire asked the judge to appoint 2 psychiatrists to determine whether or not Heiner was competent. He said that he was not able to have any meaningful conversations with his client and that he doubted that his client comprehended the charges against him and could even assist with his defense. So Dr. George Parker and Dr. Stephen Ross from IU Health Neuroscience Center and Clinical and Forensic Psychological Services of Indiana came in and they declared that he was not competent. So he was turned over to the Division of Mental Health and Addiction until he became competent with treatment. And then eventually he had a plea deal where he pled guilty and was sentenced, it looks like, to mostly time served, if I'm reading this correctly. So this was certainly not a particularly horrifying crime. It's not a murder. It's a battery case. So I think that does make sense. Although obviously it's unfortunate that he's since gone on to possibly kill some people. It does speak to somebody who has a history of pretty bad mental health issues if it's affecting him in that way where there's a history of violence, right? Mm-hmm. And so what this has kind of become a bit of a source of contention within the case because Marion County subpoenaed Miami County for all his psychiatric records. And in addition to that, they've subpoenaed Community Hospital East, North, and South for various operative records, emergency room notes, trauma sheet notes, surgery notes, consultation notes. And for some reason, maybe you can help unpack this. Something around Center of Hope records, including but not limited to any photos taken, including any containing genitalia. I don't know why the Marion County prosecutor wants that, but that is something that they want.
I'm sure there's a
good reason.
Excellent reason.
I'm sure there is too, but they're not going to be getting it because the judge ruled against them. David Heiner's team motioned to continue the trial. They said they needed more time and that the state did not object. They also objected to both subpoenas and third-party records requests. They said, first of all, that they weren't contacted prior to the state filing those requests. And they also said that the defendant did not waive his rights. This was a violation of his Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act rights, or HIPAA, as it's more commonly known. And they wanted a judge to quash the requests. And for Miami County, they argued that mental health records are not discoverable or admissible without consent of the patient, and that the state did not meet the requirements and essentially should not be allowed. So there have been a couple of recent attorney conferences, The judge has denied the community health records and said the state had until May 10th to prove legal authority or to provide legal authority. A recent April 18th hearing was attorney only. So I don't know what's going on with the other mental health records, but it's just interesting to see how sometimes names kind of come up again and again in cases. So
it's a small world, the legal world of Indiana.
Yeah, I was just excited because, Miami County is great. And I always like going up to Peru. It's a great town. So the fact that there was a Peru angle here made me happy.
Yeah, speaking of Peru, I think we need to get back up there soon. If for no other reason, I'm sure Cole Porter Festival, the Cole Porter Festival should be just around the corner. That's always around Cole Porter's birthday, which is everyone who listens to this show is well aware is on June 9th.
I think this also raises sometimes when somebody has a history of violence, there's a tendency in the media, and I'm sure I've had these thoughts as well at times, to say like, oh, well, why didn't somebody just throw the book at him back in the day and then he wouldn't have been out to kill again? And in some cases, that is a fair criticism in my view. But in other cases, if someone's pleading guilty, there's a limit to what they can be sentenced to in certain crimes. Like the judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys are not just able to do whatever. There's a system in place. There are sentencing guidelines. There are all sorts of rules about how prosecutors can even stack charges. So oftentimes the outcome when it comes to something like this is more locked in than you would think. There's not necessarily a ton of discretion.
And some people would argue that that's bad, that it was better when judges had a lot more leeway to look at the individual before them and make a decision about a sentencing more uniquely tailored to that person. Because if you talk to judges behind the scenes today, they'll sometimes tell you that, oh, this person that came before me, they were convicted. I had to give them a sentence. It was like, frankly, worse than I would have if I'd had more leeway. Or alternatively, they would have said, well, maybe I was forced to give this person a lesser sentence than I would have liked to, but my hands were tied.
Yeah. And with that, I just think it's important to remind people it's better to really look into it and sort of see why and like what the circumstances were and what the charges were before necessarily castigating public officials, I would say. And I will also add that, yeah, I think that there needs to be a reckoning in this country about mental illness and things like that, and providing more support, providing more money, more resources. But in situations where someone is, perpetually mentally ill and not, treatment is not working, then there needs to be conversations about what the best thing for that person and for society is, because being out to be violent against other people or possibly violent to oneself is not a good outcome, and that's not a safe outcome. So I don't think currently the justice system has the resources or the ability to really deal with this. I think it has to come from not just the justice system. It has to come from society as a whole. That's not a solution. But I think, unfortunately, the justice system is overburdened with a lot of cases that do have a mental health component. And that is unfortunate, because it's like probably preventative measures could help ease that strain quite a lot, I would imagine.
I would agree. Is it time to move northward up to the great state of Michigan?
Absolutely.
So my sources for this are actually some press releases that came from the Michigan State Attorney General's office, as well as a press release from the Michigan State Police, and then stories in the Detroit Free Press and on Wood TV. One thing I find interesting is balancing different interests in society and try to figure out what weight we should give to this interest as compared to this other interest. And it's also interesting to me to look at cases that someone has said this is murder, and they don't sound like a traditional murder. So this case sort of jumped out at me for those reasons. And this is a case that begins April 17th, 2024. Sergeant Keely of the Michigan State Police, Sergeant Brian Keely of the Michigan State Police, is out with a group of other state police officers, part of the fugitive task force, and they are looking for fugitives to apprehend. And they see a man named Samuel Sterling. And Mr. Sterling is a 25-year-old man who has some outstanding warrants, and he is on foot. So some officers start pursuing Sterling on foot. Other officers start sort of aggressively chasing after him in vehicles. And the chase ends up with all of these people kind of converging in the parking lot of a Burger King. And the vehicle driven by Mr. Keely is an SUV, an unmarked SUV, and it ends up striking Mr. Sterling and sort of pinning him against the outside wall of the Burger King. And there's video of all of this, and Mr. Sterling speaks on the video about being in a great deal of pain. He's transported to a hospital where he receives treatment, but unfortunately, tragically, he passes away a few hours later. And so one thing is when we balance interests, let's look at that. When is it okay for police to aggressively chase suspects? Because I think we can agree that when police are chasing suspects, whether on foot or in vehicles, that becomes an inherently dangerous situation. So we can't always say, let's always prioritize the chase over anything else, because you risk people getting hurt, not just the person being chased, but innocent passerby.
Or the police themselves in certain instances. I would say that, to me, it's a necessary chase if there is imminent risk and harm to the public or to individuals as a result. So what I mean is, like, if someone has a gun and is shooting people and then runs, and if they get away, they will presumably continue this rampage, that feels like a chase that could be necessary, or you could argue is necessary.
That makes a lot of sense. In this case, Mr. Sterling did not pose an immediate threat to himself or others. And also, when you're chasing a man who is on foot and you're in a big SUV, that also becomes a rather dangerous situation.
Yes, it's an inherently dangerous situation.
Because you are making split-second driving choices. We've all driven cars. We know it's hard sometimes to be able to predict what exactly the car does. And so it seems to be a very risky situation.
And there's no room for error. It's not like if you're chasing on foot and you bump into the guy, he might fall down and scrape his knee. If you are in a car chasing a person on foot, then the calculus is obviously considerably different, because you're in a massive, hulking, heavy vehicle made of metal, and this is a human body in front of you.
Yes.
You know, you're going to win in some sort of collision.
There's like no margin for error.
Yeah, there's no margin for error. Yeah, exactly. That is definitely dangerous.
And as I say, pretty much this entire encounter has been captured on body cams and vehicle cams, and it was released by the Michigan State Police. It's available to be viewed on YouTube and elsewhere. I don't recommend it. It's not pleasant viewing. But I think we all assume that when Mr. Keely woke up that morning, he didn't say, I'm going to go out and kill a man, or I'm going to go out and cause an accident which kills a man. But if he was acting recklessly or negligently, and a person dies as a result of that, then under our justice system and under basic morality, he needs to be held accountable. So this was investigated, and in fact, the Attorney General of the state of Michigan has announced this week that she is filing charges. She's filing one count murder, second degree, which is a life offense, or alternatively, one count of involuntary manslaughter, which is a 15-year felony. And prior to filing charges, some police chiefs and others had spoken out saying this was a bad situation, that this man was not posing a threat, and that this was excessive to be chasing a man on foot in an SUV.
I have a question, because I agree with all of this, and I agree with that assessment that this was a problematic chase. This was not, the situation didn't warrant this. Is it murder? And my question is that because this is the second sort of interesting second-degree murder charge we've heard of from this office, right?
Yes.
The other one being there was the case of a meningitis outbreak that killed people in Michigan as a result of the negligence of somebody who was in the laboratory. And that was another one where I felt a little bit iffy about, is that murder? Now, I'm certainly not saying you shouldn't file charges on something like this, because I just am like, to me, murder is a very specific charge. And I also, I get concerned if I feel like prosecutors are overcharging something, because that is a good way to lose the public's confidence if you're basically writing checks that you can't cash. So second-degree murder in Michigan, do you believe that these cases fit that?
I don't, excuse me, I don't think there was intent here.
Does there have to be intent?
Not for second-degree murder.
Okay.
But there clearly was negligence. I was struck, a former police chief and now police training consultant named Melvin Melvin L. Tucker. He had a comment about this. He said, "I would opine that Sterling was not posing a threat of serious bodily harm or death to anyone at the time of the incident, so there was not an immediate need for his apprehension, and the use of a vehicle to chase down a fleeing suspect on foot was not a reasonable action. Even a trip and fall by Sterling would have had serious consequences, and the driver of the vehicle could not respond quick enough to prevent striking him." I think that's compelling. And if you are in a position where society has trusted you to make life and death decisions, and there are basic procedures and policies in place which indicate that a particular course of action is risky and could cause death, and you pursue that and someone dies, you have to be held accountable. I wouldn't object if they ended up pleading it down to something smaller than that, but it fits the statutory definition of second-degree murder.
Because there's no intent. I think oftentimes people like myself think of murder. You think of first-degree murder. You think of that kind of intent aspect of it, or felony murder, where there may not have been an intent to do that specifically, but there's commission of a felony that leads to the death of somebody. And so if this fits, statutorily, then I think then that is within the prosecution team's discretion to go for that. I also think it can be an effective strategy for a prosecutor to charge something like second-degree murder and then be prepared to deal it down.
Plead it down, yeah.
Yeah, because that just makes your job easier, frankly. So I think that's not a bad strategy necessarily, as long as you're not overcharging. I think that would be the concern that anybody would have. But again, if it fits the law, then that's the law. So I think, it's definitely seems like a tragic situation all around.
So shall we move on to Topeka?
Yes, Topeka, Kansas.
This is a very upsetting case, and it's one that I found very frustrating, and I'm guessing that the listeners are going to find it frustrating. And I told you a little bit about it, and I think you found it frustrating.
Yeah, I did.
So this case begins with a murder that happened back in 2016, where two men basically forced themselves into an apartment where 20-year-old Camrah Trotter is with her 4-year-old child, and Miss Trotter is pregnant. So they lock the child away, and They're basically waiting for her boyfriend to come. And as they wait for the boyfriend to get home, they rape Miss Trotter. So then the boyfriend comes home and he has with him someone else, a woman with him, like a family member. The door opens, the family member sees someone with a gun. She flees, she gets away, but the man is killed. And then the woman, Miss Trotter, who has been raped and assaulted and has been alone in the apartment with her child and with these killers for hours, she then tries to call 911 and she is murdered. And because her pregnancy is late term, this is considered to be a triple homicide. So her unborn fetus is also considered to be a murder victim. So sometime later, they make an arrest in the case. And the man they arrest in the case is a man named Yanez Sanford. And the case against him seems quite strong because the child that was locked away, she identifies him. The woman that came to the door with the murder victim and saw a man there armed, she identifies him. And there is, as I mentioned, Miss Trotter was raped, and the semen in her is identified as semen belonging to Sanford.
Are you kidding me? Because I know how this ends. Okay, that's okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
He goes to trial. Mr. Sanford goes to trial earlier this year, and he is acquitted. And they say, well, sure, the child identified him, but kids can make mistakes, and maybe the kids were just trying to please the prosecutor by giving them the right answers. And sure, this woman who came to the door, she identified him, but she only saw him for a very short time, so how sure could she be? And yeah, sure, his semen is in the murder victim, but semen can stay in a body for up to a week, so who's to say maybe she had consensual sex with him, days earlier, and the semen was still in there. And they said that, the defense said that, even though there's no reason to believe that this woman was unfaithful to her boyfriend or was engaging in a relationship with this man. So he is acquitted.
That's outrageous.
It's a very strong case.
Juries get stuff wrong. I mean, we know the O.J. Simpson case being a famous example of that. Juries get stuff wrong, and it's very unfortunate. And you wonder what else was at play in their minds going with this, because that's just outrageous.
Yeah, I can tell you the father of the murder victim was very upset, and he had to be removed from the courtroom because he was, crying out. It's a frustrating case. It's very upsetting. But one thing we have to do, even though it's tough and difficult, is we have to accept a verdict, even if we're convinced to the marrow of our bones that it is incorrect. We can't engage in vigilante justice.
Why do you bring that up, Kevin?
The day after he was acquitted, this man reported to police that he was the victim of some sort of violent crime. And the details of that have not been released. And it's not even clear if this was in retaliation for him being acquitted of a crime that there's pretty good evidence he's guilty of. But it seems like that's a reasonable hypothesis, that someone out there was upset that this person seemed to get away with a triple homicide and chose to try to take matters into their own hands. And I can't stress enough, if a verdict doesn't go your way, don't take justice into your own hands, because the consequences to you personally could be horrific. And in a situation like that, even if this man can't be held criminally responsible, there's always other options. Perhaps there's a civil suit. You mentioned O.J. Simpson. He was famously acquitted of the murders, but then he was held to be civilly responsible for them.
Yeah. So I think, as you said, no matter how frustrating or horrifying a jury's conclusions are, that's our system. You can't, it's not for anyone to take justice into their own hands. You just have to accept it. And that can be difficult for people. Easier said than done if it's your loved one or someone you cared about. But ultimately, that sort of reprisal will only get the person doing the reprising in trouble, frankly, in my view.
And it seems this isn't really the thrust of Brett and Alice's article, but it does seem that there's a lot of cases out there where people seem to be wanting a very, 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 very high standard of proof before they're willing to accept the guilt of someone. And sometimes the level of proof they seem to want seems to be close to impossible.
It's unrealistic. It's not how life works, and it's not the amount of certainty. To me, if someone's in that space, it's like a foregone conclusion because they've already made up their mind and they're not going to accept something. So the goalposts are continuously moved. If I say to you, Kevin, I'll only believe that our dog Lanny ate those cookies off the table if I see a picture of her standing on the counter, and then you provide that to me. But did her stomach show, traces of cookies? Yes. Well, can we prove that those were the same exact cookies that were on the table at the time?
Yeah, we have a neighbor. Maybe the neighbor fed Lanny some cookies.
Maybe the neighbor did it. Or maybe the cookie, maybe some other dog came in and did it with her and she was just left holding the bag. And obviously, beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard. It's not, I don't know. What do you make of it?
It's an interesting trend, and it is upsetting. I look at cases, including some that we've covered, where evidence of guilt seems very, very clear, and people seem to go through all sorts of contortions to try to avoid the obvious conclusions.
I think there's a couple of factors behind this. I think the internet and the kind of communities that arise around true crime can easily be polluted with toxicity and conspiratorial thinking. That's one thing that influences people. I think that for true crime creators, there are monetary rewards for basically catering to conspiracy nonsense. And that's people who are overtly doing it, But I think it's also otherwise respectable outlets or journalists even can get caught up in this, where it's a more interesting story if the guy's innocent. It's a more interesting story if a cult did it. It's a more interesting story if, the parents are really guilty. That is a problem. And then I think there is, in many communities, perhaps understandably, a distrust of police, a distrust of prosecutors, a distrust of the system. And again, there can be rational reasons behind that, but it does not necessarily lead to the correct outcome in certain cases.
And we all watch shows like Columbo, where the criminals do a great job of framing other people. So maybe we tend to think that happens in real life a lot more often than it does.
Yeah. That's a really good point. There's definitely, I think, fiction influences people's views on crimes. And in Law and Order, this always drives me nuts. In Law and Order, there's the first person who comes up was like the person who would have done it in real life, somebody with severe mental illness, or somebody who had like some sort of grudge against the victim. And then inevitably there's a twist, and it's the guy you thought was okay, but he's really the killer. And yeah, that certainly happens in real life, but oftentimes things are just pretty simple. It's not everything is a convoluted murder plot.
Right.
And I think that's hard to believe because it's not interesting to read about simple crimes. It's much more interesting to read about and engage with the convoluted ones or the uncertain ones. And I think we have a tendency to try to make everything overly complicated and to the point of like, it's absurd. But I think people reading about crimes, just reading reading local news can help you, because you'll understand how violent this world is and how clear-cut things can often be. Is that it for that infuriating Kansas case?
Why don't you take us to
South Dakota?
South Dakota.
So my sources for this were NBC News, Kilo TV, USA Today, as well as Rapid City Journal, Casper Star Tribune, Billings Gazette, and the Associated Press, which were all accessed through newspapers.com. I really fell down a rabbit hole with this one, so... Okay. So I saw a headline that a ex-mayor of a small town in South Dakota murdered 3 people on Memorial Day. And I thought, what? Like, I need to know everything about this. So I fell down a rabbit hole. I looked into the ex-mayor, and I also looked into this town. And I think it raises some interesting questions about policing, about sexual harassment, and about power. So buckle in. So this man, Jay Ostrom, I hope I'm saying his name right, because I'm going to be saying it a lot. First comes up for me on newspapers.com in 1986. And this is a story out of Gillette, Wyoming. Hope I'm saying that right. A man who owned was a bar owner, seemingly, talked about getting assaulted by 2 officers, including Jay Ostrom. He was having an altercation with a patron of his bar out in the parking lot, and these 2 cops came up and started beating him and choking him until he passed out. So pretty serious, but ultimately a U.S. district judge found the 2 cops not guilty. But still, that is a troubling incident. Ostrom continues to work at this Wyoming police department for a number of years. He, at some point, kills a man named Warren Thomas in 1994. This situation was ruled a good shooting. Thomas shot himself, called 911, removed the bullets from his gun, went out to his yard, refused to drop the unloaded, but unbeknownst to anyone, gun, and then pointed at another officer, and Ostrom shot him. So he went on administrative leave after that, but no disciplinary action because the Division of Criminal Investigation cleared it. Then, he basically sticks around until 2003, and he had worked for the city at that point for 22 years. But then he shows up again in Centerville, South Dakota. And this town, if you are from there or you're from around there, please send us an email, because I want to know what the heck was going on here in the early 2000s. They could not keep a police chief to save their lives. One man, Rain Adamson, he was 27. He married an 18-year-old 2 weeks just after she turned 18, after dating for 2 weeks, rather. And this was right after she turned 18. He quit being police chief to start a bar. Then he gets charged with sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl. He was cleared on that, but found guilty of witness tampering and providing alcohol to minors. This is the former police chief. Then, around that time, his wife, Dana, dies from a gunshot wound to the head. The autopsy is inconclusive. A lot of people believe that he murdered her. In many situations like that, I'm a natural skeptic, where I often think that suicides are the valid explanation and people maybe can't accept that and it's not really a murder. But this is one of those ones where I have a lot of questions, and frankly, I don't necessarily think this was a suicide. I think this woman may have been murdered, but this has never gone anywhere. So that's police chief number 1. Then a 25-year-old man named Nolan Clark takes over as chief, and he hires Ostrom. He ends up getting thrown out because he has a DUI. A third police chief shows up and then leaves on his own volition. He gets another job somewhere else, so that's not that bad. But meanwhile, Ostrom is kind of making his way off. He's taking weekend shifts. He eventually becomes the Turner County sheriff's investigator. So he joins the kind of county authorities. And He then runs for a seat on the Centerville City Council in 2008. He wins, and he becomes Centerville's mayor in May of 2009. But here's where we run into more trouble with the police chief. So he's involved in hiring a woman named Rachel Kopman as the police chief. But in October, let's go back. In October of 2009, she's sort of suddenly suspended by the city council. And he told the Rapid City Journal he couldn't get into personnel issues. And then he proceeds to get into personnel issues because it has to do with offensive conduct and language, refusing to perform job assignments, and failing to listen to supervisors. But it turns out that a month before, Kopman had mentioned him and one of the other city council members to the state's Division of Human Rights, talking about how they were sexually harassing her. So September, she does that. October, she's put on ice. And so this creates a huge spat in Centerville. People are going back and forth. Some people support him. Some people support her. She says that she was dealing with a barrage of sexually charged harassment, getting pornographic texts from a city councilor. He was demeaning her. He was talking about menstruation and like men's work and how women weren't as good as men when it comes to the work and all this stuff. And people were criticizing her because she wore a bikini to a town pool while she was off duty. That was apparently like a big deal. I don't. Anyways, the whole thing just got completely chaotic. In 2012, the Argus Leader ran a story talking about how the case ended in some sort of mediated settlement. A federal judge basically said that her claims were good enough to go to a jury trial. And so then the city, Centerville settled. Everything kind of went away after that. It's not clear what the settlement was. So he resigned. Ostrom resigned as mayor in November 2011. City council accepted it. So why are we talking about him?
Excellent question.
But isn't this crazy? But I think
crazy.
It's important to understand some of this, especially the sexual stuff and the shooting other people thing, because I think it's thrown into a new light now. So he's 64 years old now. On Thursday, May 23rd, 2024, Jay Ostrom's wife told police that she and a man named Paul Frankus, who's 26 years old, were out drinking. He grabbed her and forcibly kissed her. That's her story. And also flashed his genitals. Then on Memorial Day, Monday, May 27th, she told her husband that this happened. He's been drinking, seemingly. He leaves. She doesn't see him grab any guns on the way out, but he ends up with an AR-style rifle and a .38 caliber handgun. And he did not tell her where he was going, but he apparently went to 1031 Main Street in Centerville and proceeded to shoot Paul Frankus. His Paul Frankus' younger brother, 21-year-old Zach, calls the police, says his brother was just shot and killed, then is saying the shooter just came back. Then he says, I've been shot, and then stops talking. So he's shot and killed as well, as is a man named Timothy Richmond. Authorities show up. They get there as Ostrom is leaving the house. He ignores their shouts to get on the ground. He seems to be bleeding from his left hand. And he was booked into jail on a $1 million bond on Tuesday, and he faces 3 counts of first-degree murder. So, yeah, that's apparently what happened. When I was digging into it, I was very curious. I was like, who are the victims going to turn out to be? Is it going to be someone he clashed with in the past in terms of this stuff? But it's a fight over an alleged sort of sexual assault of his wife, essentially. Forcible kiss. I guess what interests me is that he has a checkered past when it comes to sexual harassment. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
I'm not saying that I'm necessarily coming down on one side or another about whether he was guilty of that, but it certainly sounds like there was a lot of smoke there around his treatment of Police Chief Rachel Kopman. So isn't it interesting, and you and I have had conversations like this, that sometimes the men who get the most aggressive about perceived mistreatment of their female partners are also people who tend to behave in very sexist and boorish ways anyways. So why is that? What's going on there, Kevin?
I can't speak for all men. Do you have
Tell
any
me about what do
theories?
the men say about this? You and the Council of Men, the brethren. No, I mean, I know, obviously, most men are not killing people. But don't you see, like, isn't there some kind of parallel there that we've observed just in life?
Yes. We've seen instances where people make a big deal out of, well, I have to do this to protect my wife's honor. And then they end up doing something that causes themselves either embarrassment or criminal acts, or it's very performative and bizarre.
I think it tends to be, not on behalf of the woman, but it's on behalf of basically a feeling of possessiveness and the man's own honor being besmirched. So I don't think it's actually like some sort of unselfish protective impulse. I think it's a self-protective impulse, and it has to do with more of this sort of possessiveness, ownership. Like, you've disrespected me by going after my wife.
Yes.
And I think that is unfortunate. And I think
it's striking that oftentimes when you see this happen, it's pretty clear that the wife doesn't really seem to want this to happen.
No, I think we can all understand, no matter who we are, what our gender is or whatnot, feeling protective of someone you love and feeling really angry and maybe even vengeful if somebody does something that harms them or upsets them. And so that's a human understandable impulse, but it is something that I think a well-adjusted person can help support their partner and help them get the resources they need in order to press charges or deal with the situation in a way. Kind of goes back to the vigilante justice thing. And what's more in this situation, I mean, it's especially horrifying because he seemingly just runs out of the house immediately upon hearing this and kills 2 additional people who seemingly did not participate in whatever alleged assault took place. So it's just striking that this guy was in charge of this town and making decisions and being a police officer for all those years. It kind of shines the light on some of his past actions that kind of looks concerning in retrospect, because this really shows horrible judgment. But yeah, the irony of him being accused of basically being incredibly sexist and mistreating women and then getting so aggrieved on his wife's behalf in this situation just struck me as odd, but also true to some kind of type of person where
good point.
It's ego driven. It's not anything else. And that's unfortunate because now 3 people have lost their lives and he will likely spend the rest of his life in an incarcerated setting, I imagine. I mean, he's 64. He's not a young man anymore. And
64 is still very young.
Well, I mean, a long sentence would be, not something that he would necessarily be able to get out of.
You're still a baby when you're 64.
Oh my gosh. All the 64-year-olds are clapping right now. Yeah, Kevin, get her.
I'm just laying the groundwork because there's a good chance I'll be 64 one of these days.
You're not 64. But no.
Someday.
I mean, okay, fair point. But it's when people do stuff like this, I mean, do they realize they're just ruining their own lives? And that there are ways, I mean, he's a law enforcement officer with years of law enforcement experience. It doesn't cross his mind that, like, first of all, if I've got this wicked a temper, I should not have easy access to firearms in my house while I am drinking. Second of all, if I do this, I will go to jail and then to prison. Like that, and also, yeah, I don't know.
Sometimes people don't make decisions based on cold logic and rationality.
I know not everyone.
I know that's shocking to you.
I'm not exactly Mr. Spock myself, but I feel like when you're talking about like killing somebody, that's a Rubicon that you're not going to be able to get back across in many situations. So are we going to Chicago next?
Let's go to Chicago. I got this from the AP, from a lawsuit, and also I got some background from WTTW. We've been talking this show long enough. I don't know if I need to go too much into the details of this, but it involves a man named Darian Harris, who was convicted of murder and sentenced to 76 years. And it has since come out that one of the key witnesses, perhaps the key witness against him, an eyewitness against him, was a man who was legally blind.
Oh, my goodness.
And in fact, according to the lawsuit, this man was so blind, police knew he was blind. They knew he couldn't identify Mr. Harris in a lineup. And also his vision was so impaired, he couldn't even read a statement they prepared for him. So Mr. Harris spent 12 years in prison before he was exonerated, and now he is filing a suit against the city of Chicago. So this is an outrageous situation.
That is horrifying.
I'm not sure how the fact that the eyewitness was blind did not come out at the trial.
This seems like one of those things that you watch on. We talked about how fictional depictions of law and order and sort of policing are often not realistic, but this seems like one of those things you'd watch and you'd be like, that wouldn't happen. But no, it did. I mean, that's outrageous. He should sue them. Was there any other evidence against him, or was it mostly on the word of somebody?
It was mostly this eyewitness. The verdict was reached by a judge as opposed to a jury, and in the judge's statement, he said, "This isn't even a close case, especially when you consider this really dramatic testimony from this witness," and the witness was the blind guy.
Wow, geez, that's all in 12 and a half years of his life.
He's still a young man. I believe he's 30 now, but he'd lost 12 years, and he said since he's come out, it's hard to get back into mainstream society. He doesn't really have a lot of support or money. So it's an awful situation.
I really hope that.
And meanwhile, whoever committed the murder has not had to pay for it. And probably at this point, there's a chance may never pay for it.
Jeez. And so essentially the defense, or rather his suit in this case, is saying that police even basically fabricated the witness's statement.
Yeah, because the witness was blind, so the police just manipulated. And they say that some of these problems are systemic within the department, and there are other cases. And so, if there's any chance that those allegations are true, I would welcome a trial and a suit to bring them out so we can all learn the truth of it.
I mean, I should say this, but we have covered a case in Chicago. You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
And that was a mass homicide of 4 men in a fish and chicken restaurant on the South Shore area.
And they arrest a guy, and a teenager, and they say, this guy did it. Let's.
They have a press conference where they even mention his juvenile record, which you're not supposed to do.
And then it turns out that they don't disclose that this person they're publicly accusing of that crime was someone who had recently had a successful lawsuit against the city of Chicago for police brutality. And so perhaps that may have given the police a motive to go after him. But because he had this lawsuit and he had some money from that lawsuit, he was able to hire some top flight attorneys who did some investigation and came up with proof that this man couldn't have committed the crime. It's a very interesting story, and we did several episodes on it that we ran during our honeymoon.
Isn't it interesting that somebody who's, has sued them is then turned around and they're a suspect in something based on thin evidence? I'm going to say this. I tend to take a moderate view of police agencies. If I kind of tend to look at performance and specific allegations, I don't inherently assume anyone is corrupt or that anyone is perfect and can't be wrong, right? You kind of want to have a middling view, I think, in order to be fair. And if you see evidence of corruption or incompetence, you note that and you report on it. And if you don't, then you still don't necessarily assume everything they say is perfect and correct, right? A nuanced view is important. But with the Chicago Police Department, I definitely, reporting on that case, as Kevin mentioned, definitely has stuck with me. And I I was very troubled by some of what I saw. We don't have time to get into all of it, but there were essentially gangs of bicycle cops going around, and
perhaps you should link to the.
I'll link to the episode, but
several episodes.
But there was a lot of outrageous stuff going on, and it just felt like, what is going on in Chicago here? So it certainly does come to my mind when I'm hearing about something like this, where I'm like, are you kidding? Like, again, basically, like.
It's several episodes, but I should mention some of those episodes are really short.
Yeah, we didn't really know what we were doing back then. So.
Well, also we wanted to go on a honeymoon and take some time off, and so we made the episodes a little bit shorter.
Yeah, that's actually why we don't do that anymore, because we felt like we stretched it out too much, and so we kind of were like, but it's still an interesting story, and if you listen to them all at once, it's essentially like a longer episode.
It's like one long episode instead of like. It wasn't like 3 or 4 like 20-minute episodes.
Why are you putting past Anya and Kevin on blast here?
Don't you think past Anya and Kevin need to be held accountable?
Fair. We're all about holding ourselves accountable. I guess having finished up in Chicago, are we ready to head over to Philadelphia?
Yes.
This is a case that has haunted me for a long time. I'm not going to lie. So my sources for this are the FBI sort of press releases on their website, as well as ABC 7 Chicago and NBC 10 Pennsylvania. And a listener, an awesome person, asked us to cover this, so shout out to them. And I would also recommend checking out the June 11th, 2017 episode of the show Disappeared on ID called A Bridge Too Far. That's about this case. So this is the case, the disappearance of Richard Patrone and Danielle Imbo. As I said, have been haunted by this case. It's this couple, they go out on a date, a fun time out on town, and then they disappear. No trace, no convictions, just questions for their family. It's the kind of case that I think feels more personal to me, because it feels like it could be anyone. It feels like you and I, like this could happen to us. We could go out and then, because they weren't doing anything high risk. They went out for drinks with friends and never came back. And there is a sense of safety, I think, when you're out with somebody. And, it's like, well, I'm not alone, right? Oftentimes when we hear about something bad happening to somebody when they're out, they were alone, it's night, but you're with somebody else, so what could happen? But that safety can be, unfortunately, an illusion. So Richard Patrone, back in 2005, he was 35, he had a teenage daughter, and he worked at his family's bakery, Viking Pastries, in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. That's sadly since closed. Danielle Imbo was 34. She had a toddler son and worked as a loan mortgage processor, and she had separated from her husband, Joseph Imbo. So Danielle and Richard had a romantic connection, but it wasn't consistent. They were sort of like on again, off again. Patrone's family said that Joseph Imbo repeatedly made harassing and threatening phone calls to Richard, threatening him over his connection to Danielle. Imbo himself has disputed this, but that is what Patrone's family has said. And so we go to Saturday, February 19th, 2005. Richard and Danielle go out for drinks at Abilene's Bar and Restaurant. That's at 429 South Street in Philadelphia. It's since closed. It's now a place called South Flavors, I think. And they went and they met another couple for drinks. Normal night. They left around 11:45 p.m. and they were last seen walking towards Richard's parked vehicle on South Street. That's the last time they're seen. Not only are they both gone, but there's no activity on their bank accounts, no activity on their phones, and Patrone's vehicle, which is a 2001 black over silver Dodge Dakota pickup truck with Pennsylvania license plates YFH 2319 and maybe even a NASCAR sticker on the back window, that's gone. That's never been found. So I like the boring answers. One thing that's always made me interested in this case is the fact the vehicle wasn't found. To me, when a vehicle is missing, that either points to an accident, like they went into the water and had just never been found, or it points to a very highly planned or, highly successful murder where the car is also disposed of somehow. And I'll note that 429 South Street is not too far from the Delaware River. In order to drive Danielle back home to Mount Laurel Township in New Jersey, where she lived, they would have had to cross the Delaware River. I've always wondered, could something have happened in a way that somehow no one notices? But that doesn't really make a lot of sense because it's not clear to me where exactly they would have driven off. I mean, you're not going to drive off a bridge or something like and have no one notice that necessarily. So the other thing that makes me think that this is not an accident and this is foul play is the fact that the FBI seems to believe that. They actually put out a press release in 2008 saying that they believe that this is murder for hire. So they seem to have some specific information around that, and they're offering a $15,000 reward for information that leads to an arrest. I mean, tell me what you think about this, but if this is a hit, it's a highly organized and successful one, or it's one that is so lucky, like that it's unbelievable. Because these are two young people who would be missed very quickly, and a big old pickup truck. Getting rid of them and a truck, I feel like, is a hard task. That's not easy to do without leaving a trace. And so I feel like this was either highly professional or very lucky.
What about Israel Keys?
Jeez. So Alaska's serial killer Israel Keys is sometimes brought up in conjunction with this case because he had a number of missing people seemingly on his computer, and Danielle and Richard were two of them. I should note that I am a very extreme Keys skeptic. I believe that the proliferation of cases attributed to him by sleuths on the internet is bordering on ridiculous. And I think that he was a self-aggrandizing creep who, said whatever he thought would be interesting. I don't think he had anything to do with this, nor do I think he was involved in Lawrence Beer. I think I think people exaggerate his kill count. I mean, I certainly believe he was an evil murderer who did something horrible and did kill people, but I just think that it's gotten to a crazy degree, and I think if there's no evidence of someone being there, you can't just say that. I mean, there's obviously searches about these people on my computer too, and I didn't do it. I mean, that's nothing. So
Right.
I think, right now the FBI, Burlington County Prosecutor's Office, New Jersey State Police, and the Philadelphia Police Department are all still on the case. My questions in this would ultimately be for Joseph Imbo, given that they're saying murder for hire, and given that Patron's family claims that he was threatening Patron. He seems like a person who would have a reason to harm them both if he did not approve of their relationship. And that's not obviously enough to charge anyone with. And maybe for all we know, they are going in another direction by this point. But that would be where I would have the most questions in that direction. What do you think?
Yeah, I certainly share your skepticism of Israel Keys.
Yeah.
Maybe at some point we should do an episode going into that more in depth.
Yeah, sometimes when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and I feel like that's sort of the Israel Keys syndrome on the internet. Just like, this case is unsolved. Well, Israel Keys once looked at a map of Indiana. It's like, wow, thank you. That you got it. I think there's also a tendency to want to connect things because then it's like it makes it more interesting, but then you can almost like have some closure because you're like, well, Israel Keys did it, but he's gone now. It's like, it's probably someone we've never even heard of.
And that's not comforting in the slightest.
Not at all. But, true crime's True crime's not there to be comforting, right? It's there to educate and inform and keep us aware of the issues of the day. But yeah, this is a very sad case. My heart goes out to their families. I think this is probably one of the worst things possible to have something like this happen, and there's not even any indication of what really happened to your loved one. That's like a limbo. I mean, it's horrible to have a loved one murdered, but to have something like this where it's pretty clearly foul play, or at least that's a strong possibility, but you don't know who did it, they're getting away with it. I don't know. My heart goes out to them. But anyways, that's all for the cases we wanted to cover.
I had a question for you.
Okay.
Maybe this is a little bit too personal. Maybe we should edit this out, but I know you give good advice. I often, you see people online, you see people in our daily life sometimes saying, Kevin, you don't dress as stylishly as you should. I wonder, is there any way I could up my clothing and fashion game by wearing something stylish that also shows the world that I have a great taste in podcasting? Are there any options, or am I just totally hopeless?
You're totally hopeless. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, obviously you can go to murdersheetshop.com and get yourself a t-shirt. I mean, you would do that if you didn't have a bunch of inventory in your own house right now.
But I bet if I did that, my whole life would change for the better. At least I hope, because I desperately need a change.
Are you trying to get me to say that if if listeners buy a Murder Sheet People t-shirt right now from that murdersheetshop.com website, that their lives will change for the better, and that just good things will happen and just the good vibes will come down immediately and they'll just see instant improvement in every area of their lives? Is that what you're trying to get me to say?
Anya, that's a bold claim. I hope no one turns you into the FDA. But if they do, please note that was said by Anya Kane.
In jest.
Only. I didn't make those outrageous claims, but you know, maybe they are true.
Oh, you don't know. You're not skeptical. You just don't know all the facts.
Yeah, maybe we should do some sort of experiment where people should get the shirts and see if it changes their lives for the better.
Or at the very least, you'll look really cool, because I'm really proud of the printer did a great job. Our logo has a lot of different colors in it, and apparently that's a whole thing when it comes to printing t-shirts. We learned that the hard way. And so this looks pretty great. And it says the Murder Sheet People. So if you want to be a Murder Sheet person, you can order them. And if you are a member of our Patreon, you get $5 off shipping. So free shipping, rather. So totally free shipping. So that is all very exciting. And I hope you like them if you get them. And for everyone who has ordered one, all you wonderful people, we just want to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts. It really is a huge show of support, and it really helps us out. And we think you're going to look nifty.
And it keeps Anya in cereal boxes.
Yeah, and it keeps me under the watchful eye of the FDA, apparently. Can you imagine that? Remember, you made a joke about me getting arrested at an Arby's once, and then that somehow turned on Reddit into me getting arrested at a McDonald's, which has never happened. I've never been arrested.
Arby's. It was
I've never been arrested in my life. And
you came close over at the grocery store.
I've never become close to being arrested in my life. And not only that, so this Kevin makes a joke, this rumor mill spills out. Suddenly I'm a convicted felon holding hostages at McDonald's. I'm sure that's where it's going, or like White Castle of all places. And then, so this is going to be one of those things, I'm sure soon I will be like in the FDA interrogation room. Someone will do a YouTube live documenting it. It's going to just spiral.
And if she was under interrogation, she would break immediately.
Are you kidding me? That is not true.
There was one time, I know we've talked way too long, but there's one time a police officer pulls me over and gets aggressive with me. And you were so nervous, you were prepared to break and confess to everything, even though you weren't even the driver of the car.
I was nervous because I thought he was going to he seemed to get really aggressive really quickly. And I thought you were being such a glib lawyer that I thought he was going to get mad at you or something.
The policeman pulls me over and says, "Do you know what you did wrong?" And if a policeman asks you, "Do you know what you did wrong?" and you say, "Oh, yes, officer, I did this wrong." Well, then you've made an admission.
That was a scary moment.
So he kept on trying to get me to say, "Do you know what you did wrong?" I said, No. And he said, "Oh, well, I think you did this." And I said, "Well, that's your opinion. I certainly respect it, sir." And he was getting increasingly upset. He said, "Well, if you just admit it, I'll let you go." And I said, "Well, I mean, you do whatever you want." And he got increasingly upset. You're shaking like a leaf.
I'm not shaking. I'm not. Oh my gosh. You're so
sweat was pouring off you.
Dramatic.
But then he lets me go.
The dramatics. I agree with you, not because of that incident, but because, do you remember when we were coming back from Canada at one point and the border guards asked me, because I was driving, "Where are you coming from, ma'am?" And I said, "Indiana." as we're crossing the border coming from Canada. And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Oh,"
He circumnavigated the whole globe.
We parachuted in last night. Oh man. Yeah.
So you'd break.
Yeah. Well, you know what? So would you.
I didn't get a ticket, did I?
I didn't get a ticket the one time I was speeding in Peru. So
You're just batting your little eyes at him.
I wasn't doing that. I'm really sorry. Like I don't know. What are you smirking at? Oh my gosh, this man.
Well, have a good weekend, everybody.
Yeah, you guys have fun.
I think Guy and I are going to have a long talk.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a conversation after this one.
Isn't the way most episodes end?
Just-
With me saying we have a long talk.
We just careen off a cliff at some point.
Thelma and Louise. Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
There's nothing worse than getting home from your trip only to find you missed a can't-miss travel experience. That's why you need Viator. Book guided tours, activities, excursions, and more in one place to make your trip truly unregrettable. Viator makes it easy to explore over 300,000 travel experiences. Everything from simple tours to extreme adventures, and all the niche, interesting stuff in between. So you can plan something that everyone you're traveling with will enjoy. Real traveler reviews give the inside scoop from people who've already been on the experience you're considering, so you can plan with confidence. Free cancellation helps you plan for the unexpected. And 24/7 customer service means you always have support around the clock. Download the Viator app now to use code Viator10 for 10% off your first booking in the app. Regret less. Do more with Viator.